Hi folks, Nathan Pierce here with Family Protection Ministries. It is June 23rd, Friday. Happy weekend. I am glad to be at the end of this week. It's been quite a doozy. We have a couple of updates for you on some legislation, specifically on SB 407, which was heard this week, Tuesday, in the Assembly Human Services Committee. It's amazing how difficult it can be for some people to answer a straight question. And we saw that this week in the Human Resources Committee, and I think you'll like to hear a little bit about this, but also be concerned deeply for the state of the legislature and for the decisions that they make and how they make them, even in light of the serious questions that are being asked and unable to be answered in a straightforward manner. So let's get into it. Welcome to the Front Line with FPM, where we talk about California politics, homeschool freedom, parental rights, and the family. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce, and thanks for joining us today. Let's jump right in and see what's going on here on the Front Line. So, in the hearing for SB 407 in the Assembly Human Services Committee, Mr. Alanis, that is Mr. Assembly Member Alanis, who represents a district in the northern portion of the Central Valley in California, he asked a question that's pretty straightforward. If foster parents don't agree with the state's perspective on gender identity, will they still be allowed to have foster children? Will they still be allowed to be foster parents and volunteer in that way to serve foster children? And the answer was extremely long-winded and ultimately ended up not really being an answer. And that non-answer came from the sponsor of the bill that was assisting in presenting information about what the bill would actually do. And unfortunately, that information was not very clear. And in fact, I think it was extremely misleading, because ultimately what the bill does is it actually says that parents not only must they affirm the gender identity of the child, but they must provide and seek out and make available any and all resources that the state makes available. So if there's something out there that the state makes available, it's a burden on the parent, on the foster parent, to first of all know about each and every opportunity, each and every potential resource that the state makes available. But then they're also legally obligated to make those resources specifically available to the foster children. So this is an impossible task. It's an impossible legal requirement. And yet the sponsor of the bill was not able to answer the question. Ultimately, the answer is no. If a family does not agree with the state on gender ideology, they cannot any longer be foster parents. And that's what this bill, SB 407, does. Now, that is a concern in and of itself, and that makes this bill a bad bill by itself. But it's not half of it. The problem is much bigger than that, and let me explain that. SB 407 is a tiny piece of a big, big picture, as we have looked at bills that deal with family relationships, family parents' authority, with AB 1057, the home visits bill. You look at social workers coming into the home to tell parents how to parent, how to be parents, how to raise children. And you're looking at the authority of parents, the role of parents being undermined and eliminated in the state of California, and the state of California, the government, becoming and inserting itself not only into families, but into the role of parents, and taking over that role, taking over the responsibility of parent, taking over the rights of parents, not just their responsibility and their duty, but also their ability and their freedom to act as they are called to act as parents, as laid out in basic principles of Scripture that shows us what a family ought to be. So this whole big picture of family is being undermined by so many different little bills that seem small and seem perhaps insignificant by themselves. But when you look at them in the whole, when you look at them all together and the direction that they're taking the state of California, the trajectory is not a good one. And it's as though we are realigning a rocket directly into the sun to be eventually burned up. And we might say, oh, well, we're just going a tiny bit. We're only going, a half a mile. So it's not that big of a deal. But when you add a half a mile and another half a mile and another 50 miles and another 100 miles, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, ultimately you end up all the way in the center of the sun. And that is not a good place for us to be. Our society needs to stay able to function. And at the very core of a functioning society is the family itself. And we must not give in on these issues of parental authority and responsibility. So when we look at SB 407 and how it relates to foster parents, this is just a shadow of what ultimately will be coming, which would be parents must sign a statement of gender ideology that the state agrees with, and we must sign that statement in order to be foster parents. Well, that's just today. Next week or next year, it could be the parents that want to adopt a child. It could be parents who have already adopted a child. It could be parents that have biological children, and now the state is saying, no, you don't agree with our gender ideology, so you must therefore relinquish your parental rights in the state of California because we don't allow parents like you here. You don't agree. You don't sign our statement of gender ideology, so you will not be allowed to be a parent in this state. That's what this is leading toward, folks. And that's why we must take a position on bills like SB 407 and 957. We have got to take these bills seriously, and we have got to stop them now. We've got to make sure that our legislators are hearing from us today. Now, this bill, SB 407, passed the Committee on Human Resources in the Assembly on Tuesday. That means next, it's going to be eventually brought up for a vote in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, where they decide how much money they have to spend on these bills. That means that all the members of the Assembly Appropriations Committee will have to make a decision on how to vote on this bill. SB 407 would then, if it gets passed through that committee, it would go to every single assembly member, and every single assembly member, all 80 of them in California, would have to vote on whether or not they want SB 407 to pass. So that's 2 more stops before it goes to the governor's office. At minimum, it has 2 more stops. It could get even more complicated than that, but for now, let's just go with 2 more stops. Each one of these stops is a potential place for this bill to die. And I would encourage you to take the opportunity to make a phone call today to ask your legislator to vote no on this. You can make sure that you understand clearly what this bill is and what it does on our website. If you go to fpmca.org and just type in the search bar SB 407, it'll give you a clear action item, and it'll give you an information about what this bill does. So I would encourage you to take that action today. You can also look at the other bills that we are actively opposing and weigh in on those as well by contacting your legislators on them. But make sure that they hear from you. It's important that you are heard from, because legislators care about who is going to be voting in the next election. And they care about, to some degree, and for whatever reason it might be, they care about what people in their district think. They may not vote with you, but they cannot avoid being impacted by knowing what your position is. So make sure that they hear from you, because it will make a difference. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Front Line with FPM. For more information about the topics we discuss here, check out Family Protection Ministries at fpmca.org and subscribe to our channel.